Hello and welcome to the RSC webinar on Brexit, EU research and innovation funding. The next half an hour is going to be a session focused on this particular aspect of the UK leaving the EU. So welcome to the webinar. My name's Tanya Sheridan. I will briefly outline where things are at in the negotiations between the EU and the UK and touch upon what that means for UK participation in EU research and innovation programmes. And Mindy Dulé is my fellow panellist, and she will talk in more detail about those programmes and the UK research landscape. The session is being recorded, so it will be available afterwards, and we will present for about 15 to 20 minutes between us. After that, we will take questions, so please put your questions in the chat box as they occur to you, and then we can take them after the presentations. So please, could we have the next slide now, Natalie? As you know, the Brexit transition period after the UK left the EU will finish on the 31st of December. And so the question is, what next? As you will also have heard from listening to the news, this is not 100% certain yet, and we recognise that that is a real issue for researchers who are thinking about where to apply for the next grant, or who are already experiencing issues when trying to become part of a European collaboration. I think there's still hopes for a deal. The language this weekend and from the two negotiating teams suggests that there are hopes to do a deal, and it may well be that it's done this week. And that would be the future trading relationship and the rules and conditions for free trade to continue between the UK and the EU. What does this mean for participation in Horizon Europe, which is the EU's next research and innovation 7-year programme? In the end, I think that a deal would be needed for the UK to participate in that programme as an associate member, which non-members of the EU are able to do, because of the impacts and relationship effects of a no deal or of not reaching a deal during the transition period. I think a deal will be a necessary prerequisite to join Horizon Europe. And both sides do seem to be saying good things about wanting to reach a deal. There's a lot in it. So for the UK, 43% of exports are going to the EU, and 52% of UK imports come from the EU. So the UK is also a significant trading partner. But as we've seen, there are still some differences on fisheries, state aids and governance of a deal, and significant political differences in the priorities of the two parties. So if there is a deal, then it would be possible for the UK to associate to Horizon Europe. That programme is not quite finalised. The German presidency is planning further meeting between the Council, the European Parliament and the Commission on the 10th of December. So it's likely but not certain that we would see what the final programme looks like and what that would mean for associated countries. The other piece of the jigsaw is whether the UK government is likely to sign up and considers it to be sufficient value for money. Here at the RSC, we've been making the case that there is a lot of value in the UK associating to Horizon Europe, given the significance of EU funding for chemistry and also the intangible benefits that the UK chemistry and EU chemistry have experienced as a result of participation in the framework programmes. So there are a few pieces yet to fall into place, which will significantly impact whether the UK associates to the next framework programme. And I will hand over to Mindy to talk a bit more about that.
Okay, thank you very much, Tanya. Next slide, please. So Tanya mentioned some of those uncertainties at the top level, so the pieces of the puzzle that have yet to be solved. So she talked about the budget and also the Horizon Europe programme itself as well. So until those two parts of the puzzles are resolved, it's difficult to know what the situation with association will be. From a UK perspective, a key thing that needs to be resolved are the final terms of association for third countries to Horizon Europe, including the level of access to different streams. So there is a draft text of the Horizon Europe regulation, but as Tanya mentioned, this hasn't been agreed. Another uncertainty is what alternatives to Horizon Europe will look like. We do have some information on this. So the UK government in July published its R&D roadmap, and it committed to putting in place ambitious alternatives to Horizon Europe if the UK cannot associate to Horizon Europe. And we do have some information on what these alternatives will look like, which I'm just going to cover very briefly. So we know that one of the streams that is under consideration is a discovery fund, and this fund will be set up in such a way that it would provide long-term large grants for individual researchers. So these could be researchers at early, mid, or established career stage from anywhere in the world who want to carry out their research in the UK. So you can see from the characteristics that are being discussed around the Discovery Fund, this kind of fund could potentially act as an alternative to European Research Council funding. We also know another element that is under consideration is enhancing prestigious domestic schemes that support researchers and innovators. So what would this look like in practice? So in practice, this could mean uplifts in funding for fellowships that the government already funds. So for example, fellowships that may come through UKRI, and also potentially programs that are run by Innovate UK as well, that are there to support entrepreneurs and those in small businesses progress their own innovations and products. And then finally, the other element that we are aware of is funding to enable the UK to associate as a third country to programs. So this would be funding to enable UK-based researchers to take part in those large-scale pan-national collaborative networks. So many of you will be aware of different kinds of programs that have been funded under Horizon 2020 and previous framework programs that really enabled researchers to come together to tackle big challenges. And it's funding that third country association funding would enable the UK to continue to participate in those sorts of transnational programs as well. However, what we don't know yet is exactly what these things will look like. So for example, how will you apply as a researcher? What will those deadlines look like? And what will the application process look like as well? And these are all questions where we're asking for clarity because we know that it's needed urgently. Next slide, please. I thought I'd just briefly cover what the RSC has been doing as well on association to Horizon Europe. So we are really clear that association is by far the best outcome for chemistry. So as Tanya mentioned in her introduction, we know from the evidence that you've shared with us that association brings many benefits for researchers in the UK, in Europe, and even more widely as well, because it means that scientists can collaborate and share their knowledge. However, we do also recognise that association may not be possible. And we've also been clear that if domestic alternatives are needed, then they must provide the same combination of benefits for both UK researchers and the UK more widely as well. So Tanya talked about those intangible benefits. So that could be the access to networks within easy reach if you're an early career researcher, or if you're in an SME, being able to be put in touch with a mentor in a company elsewhere in the EU to help you think through your business ideas. And if you want to read a bit more about what we've been saying, then you can find out more in the two position statements that are mentioned on the slide. We've also been firm in asking for clarity and asking for clarity quickly on what is happening in terms of alternatives to Horizon Europe as well. And we are engaging with both officials and also with the Minister for Research, Science and Innovation as well on this point. Next slide, please. Okay, so what can you do in amongst all of this certainty and in such a challenging space? So on this slide, we've tried to bring together the key links and the key places that we think you need to sort of keep aware of and keep ahead of so that you can keep up to date on what is happening in such a fast changing environment. So the UK Research Office is UK Research and Innovation's office in Brussels, and it's a great source of information for researchers who are looking to access EU R&D funding. If you are part of an eligible institution, if you're working in an eligible institution, you can sign up to email updates from UCRO. Eligible institutions are normally universities or research institutes, and if you're not sure whether or not your institute is eligible, you can check on the UCRO website. For those of you who are working in SMEs and small and medium enterprises that might be concerned about what the end of the transition period may bring for your business and eligibility, you can get in touch with the Enterprise Europe Network UK contact point, and we've provided the email address contact@enterpriseeurope.co.uk on the slides. And then finally, there's some useful links collated together from different sources across UK government that are working to try to get messaging out to researchers to make sure that they can keep informed. So UCRO have composed a Brexit fact sheet that we've provided a link for, and there's also links to both the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy and UK Research and Innovation's web pages on this topic. Finally, because there is so much information out there, one of the things we've been trying to do is make sure that we can signpost our community to the most important bits of information when it comes out and when you need it. So if you don't already follow us on social media, do follow the RSC on Twitter at Roysott-Chem. And if you've not joined the Royal Society of Chemistry group on LinkedIn, you can join that as well. And next slide, please. And that brings us to the end of mine and Tanya's short introduction, and we're open to take your questions now.
Thanks, Mindy and Tanya. So we've had a couple questions through already. If anyone has some more whilst we start answering these first two, then please go ahead and send those in the question or chat box. So the first question is asking, how will Brexit affect cost actions?
Ooh. So cost, yeah, so for those who aren't aware, cost actions are networking actions that bring together researchers from across the EU. And I would say at this stage that without the clarity on what the new programme looks like and actually what cost will look like under Horizon Europe, it's difficult to give a definitive answer as to how they will be affected. Like many of the other programs that we've spoken about, there is still a lot that is uncertain. So there may be issues to do with eligibility, and it will depend upon whether or not the UK is or isn't able to associate to Horizon Europe.
Thank you. And the next question is a bit broader. So it's sort of asking, what will the support be for businesses post 31st of December?
That as in, so I'll assume that that's support as in support for innovative businesses, SMEs, support along the lines of that provided under the framework programmes and other EU programmes. And the RUK support, sorry, Innovate UK support will still be in place, plus all the business support that is provided by UK government. In terms of specific schemes, probably worth just clarifying the question, and if we don't know, then we can always take it away and find out.
Thanks, Tanya. So we haven't actually got any other questions at the moment. So if anyone has any more, please go ahead. Oh, one's just come through. So the question is this situation likely to impact R&D tax relief, particularly for SMEs?
That's quite a complex question. I suppose R&D tax relief is very much something for the UK as a government to consider, and I suppose I would direct the asker of the question perhaps to the R&D roadmap in terms of setting out some of the government's ambitions in terms of trying to support businesses, and we know things such as tax credits, tax relief are an important element of the toolkit that government can use to support small businesses. At this stage, we know that that is something that UK government is thinking about anyway, irrespective of EU exit. So I would say that it's worth probably keeping tuned in to R&D policy more widely, not just thinking about this in the context of Brexit.
Thanks, Mindy. So next question says, UK funding is quite restrictive in terms of the selection of PhD and postdoc candidates' nationalities or residence. Do you think this will change after Brexit?
So I think there are some changes already, and we can perhaps follow up on this in terms of eligibility of those working on projects. So we can share some of those points in follow-up, perhaps. I don't have the exact information to hand, and then there's the work that the government are doing as well on the global talent visa, so that's more applicable to postdoctoral research associates. So there is a lot of change when it comes to routes in terms of international researchers being able to carry out their research in the UK. And that is something where, again, we're looking to try and signpost our community as best as we can to up-to-date information on what the government is thinking.
Thank you. Next question is asking, if we do end up with a no-deal Brexit, and this excludes UK research from leading Horizon projects, will we still be able to take part as an invited partner, or would we end up being completely excluded from such projects?
So based on what the UK government has set out, they would look to introduce funding to enable the UK to take part as a third country participant in collaborative research projects. Now, what the exact process for that will be, so how you secure funding, how it links to project planning for Horizon Europe, isn't clear at this stage. But at the top level, the government has expressed a desire to support UK researchers to continue to take part as third countries.
Thanks. And this question is asking, how will Brexit affect the number of fully funded science PhD projects in the UK, and also the number of UK students going to study in the EU?
Okay, so I think in terms of the second part of that question, I think, well, actually, in terms of both parts of the question, these things are unknowns. So particularly that first point on funding and what the impact of Brexit will be in terms of PhD funding, that very much depends again on whether or not the UK is able to secure association, and if it isn't, what alternatives, UK alternatives, actually look like in practice. So actually, many of you may have seen last week or have caught up in the news that Rishi Sunak announced 14.6 billion for research and development funding in the coming year. What we still don't know is some of the detail of that. So, for example, there's potential for sort of domestic funding to be spent in many ways. We don't know precisely how that big that sort of big envelope of money will be used in research and development funding yet.
Thank you.
It may also depend on other conditions as well, such as the visa and immigration policies being adopted in individual member states, and they will to some extent vary between those member states.
Thank you. And so the next question is asking, for those with joint affiliations with UK and EU member state institutions, what percentage of a Horizon Europe grant can be allocated to the UK institution?
That's a very specific question. And again, apologies if this sounds like a broken record. It absolutely depends on whether or not we associate or not. So it really does. There is still much that is hinging on the continued negotiations this week and what that means in terms of what kind of association agreement the UK can then negotiate after the main trade deal on association to Horizon Europe. So potentially, if we can fully associate, UK may be able to fully participate in a huge range of programs. If we can only associate to certain streams, then I suppose the person who is asking that question may be thinking about whether or not to consider their dual seat, and whether or not they would want to put forward their affiliation with one institute more than another. And it will depend on whether or not we associate and what the association agreement looks like.
Thanks, Mindy. The next question is asking, will there be an alternative to SME membership in Horizon 2020 in the proposals?
Right, okay, so the government is very aware that they need to have an alternative, and they have talked about scaling up, potentially scaling up, as you saw on the slide, existing schemes as an alternative. I'm making an assumption that the question here is referring to what was the SME instrument and will be known as the EIC Accelerator in Horizon Europe. And on that, the government is well aware of what a huge gap this is. So some of you will probably be aware we have a network of SMEs called Enterprise Plus. We've been really fortunate to put members from our SMEs in front of the Science Minister to make clear how important it is that we actually get an alternative to this. So we're hopeful that there will be something that will plug that gap. What the shape of that is still not clear at this point in time.
Thanks, Mindy. So this question is asking, if we don't have clarity on the UK's position when Horizon starts, what would be the best way to stay involved with Europe to be ready if and when we do get a deal later on?
So, I mean, one of the things, and I think we've been hearing it from our community as well, and I suppose, you know, we as an international organisation with so many member networks, we absolutely want to be supporting our members and encouraging our members to continue those collaborations because they're so vital to science. And I think the best thing that we can do is talk about maintaining those relationships and trying to keep those collaborative conversations and collaborative partnerships up. We've actually got another obstacle that many of us have been negotiating this year in the form of COVID-19 in terms of trying to keep those relationships and collaborations alive. And we've seen some fantastic work by researchers in being able to actually really rise to the challenge of COVID-19 alongside Brexit as well. So I think keeping those collaborative relationships going is such an important and vital part of this, and can help researchers stay in a good place should the UK be able to associate quickly to Horizon Europe.
We've also seen various UK universities deepening their partnerships with universities in EU member states. And so those partnerships may also be a useful route for UK-based researchers to build networks with other potential collaborators in EU member states.
Thank you. This question's asking, has the UK tried to quantify how much money we added to EU research budgets? And if so, is there a promise that this will be matched should we not have access after?
Okay, so this is a difficult calculation to make because I'm sure many of you are aware that whilst the UK was a member of the EU, the way EU contributions work is that you provide money up front in, you don't provide it programme by programme. Work has been done on this. I don't have the figure to hand, but I believe the Royal Society did some work on this based on contributions relating to Framework Programme 7, so the programme that preceded Horizon 2020. We do not have that level of commitment from government saying this will be like for like and this will be what UK research gets. What we do have is we have a commitment from government to reach spending on science of 22 billion by 2024-25, which is a positive commitment and should be welcomed in terms of an increase to research and development funding. A big question for our community is where will funding to associate for Horizon Europe fit and sit in relation to the wider R&D budget, and that is something where we're pushing for government to make sure that they are investing in alongside funding for research and development.
Thanks, Mindy. Someone would like to know who is the UK Minister for Chemistry or Science and Innovation?
Okay, yeah, so that is, so do you want to take that one, Tanya?
Amanda Soloway is the Minister for Research and Innovation at BEIS.
Yeah. Thank you. Do we know yet how state aid rules for R&D SMEs will change?
No, and this is I suspect, the $64 million question. We know that of the issues that have proved most challenging in the future trade deal, that fisheries and state aid are pretty much the top two. Tanya, do you want to say anything else on that from the perspective of the overarching negotiations?
No, that's very much where things are at, that state aid is still one of the sticking points. And being very frank, we organised this webinar for the end of November thinking, well, that's another big deadline that's been set for the negotiations, so we should be able to tell everybody what the score is, but there isn't a deal yet. There is a reasonable prospect of a deal. There is still a real possibility of a no deal, but we don't know.
Yeah, and I suppose the inference in the question there is that theoretically, if the UK did not have to follow EU state aid guidelines, that could change the landscape in terms of what the levels of state aid it could potentially provide to companies within the UK. But this is still unclear.
And I suppose will also depend not just on what are the rules, but also what's the state of the public finances.
Absolutely.
We've got a question here asking if we will be doing another webinar when this information is more clear.
I'm not
That's
sure.
an idea we'll take away and consider, particularly if there's strong feedback that it would be really helpful.
Great. So we haven't actually got any other questions. We've got a couple of minutes left. If anyone has any more questions, please go ahead and pop them in the chat box. Otherwise, I suppose we could finish up. Tanya, did you have any last words you wanted to say?
Just to thank everybody for coming to the webinar, particularly thank you for the questions. And we will be sending out an email as follow-up with links to the resources that Mindy talked through to help people monitor the very, or potentially very rapidly developing situation and its implications.
Great.
Yeah, and thank you for your questions.
Yeah, thank you for all the questions, everyone.